It was a quiet night, the kind I'd come to appreciate over the last 20 years on a job. Some people think firefighting is a constant stream of sirens, roaring flames, and last-second rescues, but the truth is, a lot of shifts pass in silence. And in a town like ours, big enough to keep us busy, small enough to have more slow nights than not, there were plenty of times where the alarm never rang at all. I sat in the common area, half watching whatever late-night show was droning on, the volume low so the others could sleep. My gear sat in its usual spot, ready to go. My body was relaxed, but my mind was always primed for the alarm. After all these years, instinct never slept. The bell rang, and everything shifted. Adrenaline surged through me as I was on my feet in an instant. The guys moved with the same practice urgency, each of us suiting up as dispatch came through the radio. House fire. A single caller, a man, had phoned in the fire and given the address before abruptly hanging up. Strange. Most callers stuck on the line, panicked, desperate for help. As we pulled out of the station, sirens cutting through the stillness of the town, the address gnawed at me. It was familiar. Too familiar. I ran it through my mind, trying to place it, but between the rush of movement and the need to focus, it just stayed out of reach. When we arrived, the fire was still in its early stages. Flames crawled up the side of the house, flickering hungrily against the night sky. Smoke leaked from the upstairs windows, but the fire hadn't yet consumed the structure. It was manageable, which meant we had a chance. No one was outside, no sign of the caller. That was never a good sign. We had to assume someone was in there. I ran towards the front door with another firefighter at my side. The door was locked. A few solid kicks, and the wood splintered and the door crashed inward. Heat and smoke billowed out, thick and choking, but I forced myself through. We called out, but no response came. The smoke pressed in around us as we pushed deeper into the house. My partner took the lower level while I moved towards the stairs. Each step creaked beneath my weight. The temperature climbed with every foot forward. At the top of the stairs, I spotted an open door at the end of the hall. The fire glowed from within, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. And then I saw her, a woman, sprawled out on the floor, motionless. Something inside me clenched. My mind screamed at me to focus on the job, to push away the shock. But recognition hit me like a punch to the chest. I knew her. I had no time to process it. I rushed forward, kneeling beside her. Her face, half lit by the glow of the flames, was eerily still. Smoke curled around her body. She needed air. She needed out. I hoisted her up, throwing her over my shoulder in a practice motion, and turned back for the stairs. The fire raged behind me, crackling as it consumed the room. I hurried down the stairs, every muscle in my body screaming for me to move faster, get out before the structure weakened. My partner met me at the base of the stairs. He asked if anyone else was up there. I told him no. He gave me a hesitant look. I didn't have time to explain it to him, but I was positive. I carried her outside just as the paramedics arrived. They took over immediately, checking her vitals, giving her oxygen. My heart pounded as I stood back, watching them work. She was alive. The fire was brought under control within the next half hour. Some of the guys speculated that a candle had started it, that she must have fainted, knocked it over, and been overcome by the smoke. A simple, tragic accident. But then the question that sent a chill through my spine. If she was alone, who called in the fire? I didn't answer. I already had a feeling, a deep gnawing suspicion that I couldn't shake. But I needed proof. Back at the station, I requested the call recording from dispatch. They sent it to me within minutes. I played it, and my heart stopped. I knew that voice. It had been years since I last heard it, but there was no mistaking it. I drove to the hospital, my mind racing the entire way. When I arrived, I found her room and stepped inside. She was awake. The moment she saw me, tears welled up in her eyes. She said my name, reaching for me, relief washing over her face. I sat beside her, told her I was glad she was okay. Her fingers gripped mine, but then she frowned, her expression shifting. She asked how we knew that she was in trouble. My breath caught. I looked at her. I told her John called me. She froze. Confusion turned to disbelief. Her husband had died years ago, a firefighter just like me. He had saved a family, but the flames had taken him before we could reach him. I had been there. I had watched it happen. Before he died, he made me promise to look after his family, and tonight, he made sure that I kept that promise. When I was 7, my parents had a work event that kept them out late. Our usual babysitter couldn't make it, so I ended up spending the night at my aunt's house. I knew Aunt Lila well enough. She was kind and always had hidden candy in her purse, but I had never been to her house before. That night started innocently enough. Aunt Lila ordered pizza and we watched a movie. She tried her best to make it fun, but all I wanted to do was go home. Eventually, it got late, and Aunt Lila took me to the spare bedroom. The room was plain, a bed, a dresser, and nothing else. She tucked me in, promised to leave the hallway light on, and kissed my forehead, telling me goodnight. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tossing and turning. The mattress was uncomfortable, and I couldn't shake the weird feeling of being in a new place. Eventually, though, sleep came, and so did the dream. In the dream, I woke up in a massive, unfamiliar house. It was old, creaky wooden floors, peeling wallpaper, dim lighting. The kind of place that felt alive in its silence. I called out for my parents, my voice echoing back to me, but no one answered. I wandered through room after room, every door leading to another hallway or staircase. The house seemed endless, a labyrinth designed to trap me. Panic started to set in when I saw her, the old lady. She stood at the end of the hallway watching me. Her face was deeply wrinkled, and her gray hair tied back into a loose bun. But what caught my attention was the necklace she wore. A large purple gem surrounded by what looked to be a star. It seemed to glow faintly in the light. At first, she just watched me. Then she began to follow. I tried to ignore her, pretending she wasn't there, but every time I glanced back, she was closer. She never said a word, but her smile grew wider with each step. There was something unholy about that grin, like she enjoyed my fear. When she was only a few feet away, I turned and ran. Her footsteps echoed behind me as she gave chase, her silence more terrifying than any scream. I sprinted through the endless halls, my chest tightening with fear. Then she caught me. Her bony fingers grabbed at the back of my shirt, yanking me towards her. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her smile widened, her necklace glowing brighter, and I woke up. I was drenched in sweat, my body frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream for help. It felt like I was still trapped in that dream. Minutes passed before I finally regained control of my body. I ran to Aunt Lila's room, sobbing hysterically. She let me sleep in her bed for the rest of the night. The nightmare should have ended there, but it didn't. The old lady came back, again and again. Not every night, but often enough to haunt me. Each time, the dream was the same. The endless house, her silent pursuit, the glowing necklace. It got to the point where I knew I was dreaming as soon as it started, but it didn't matter. She always caught me. One night, when I was about 10, I woke up from a dream with a sharp pain on my back. I went to the bathroom, lifting up my shirt to look in the mirror. There, on my skin, was a red handprint, like someone had pressed their palm into me with searing heat. By morning, it was gone. The dream stopped about the time I started going to college. I thought I was finally free. Years passed. I got married, had a child, and moved on with my life. I never talked about the lady, not to my husband or anyone. It felt like a bad memory best left buried. But then she came back. It happened a few months ago. My daughter Sophie woke me up with a scream that froze my blood. I ran to her room, flipping on the light. She was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. I asked her what was wrong, sitting down next to her, trying to comfort her. She told me that she had a bad dream. I stroked her hair, trying to calm her down. I told her everything was okay and that it was just a bad dream. But then she told me about it. She described waking up in a big, scary house. She said she got lost, looking for me and her dad. But she mentioned the old lady, the one with the glowing purple necklace. My heart stopped. She smiled the whole time, Sophie whispered, trembling. She didn't talk, but she chased me. And when she caught me, I woke up. Tears blurred my vision as I hugged her tight. I didn't know what to say. The old lady wasn't just in my head, she was real. And now, she was haunting my daughter. I've spent every night since then sleeping in Sophie's room, praying the dreams won't come back, but deep down, I know they will. College wasn't easy for me. My parents never had much money, so I had to pay for everything myself: tuition, books, rent, food. And no matter how many part-time jobs I picked up, it was never enough. Eventually, the debt caught up with me, and I had to drop out. I found work at a local factory, the kind of job that paid the bills but left you too exhausted to think about anything else. As if things weren't bad enough already, my phone broke. It wasn't even old, just a few months, and now completely useless. A new one was out of the question, so I started searching online. And that's when I found it, an iPhone, a few years old but in good condition. Only $100. The listing was vague, but it said it worked like new. I didn't have the luxury of being picky, so I bought it immediately. It arrived a few days later. I switched out my SIM card, and everything seemed fine. No issues setting it up, no weird glitches. I even told myself I'd gotten lucky. Then, a few days later, the first call came. The screen lit up with an unknown number, but the caller ID displayed a name, Caroline. I didn't know a Caroline. I answered anyway, but all I heard was static. Then, beneath the static, a muffled female voice. She was saying something, but I couldn't understand it. Before I could speak, the call ended. At first, I brushed it off as a wrong number, but the calls didn't stop. They started coming every few days. Always the same, static, a faint voice, then silence. Then they got more frequent. The more they happened, the clearer the voice became. And that's when I realized something that made my skin crawl. She could hear me. This wasn't some pre-recorded message. Whenever I spoke, the voice would pause, as if listening. But no matter how hard I tried, I could never make out what she was saying. That was until one night, when the static disappeared entirely. I had just gotten home from work when my phone rang. Caroline. I answered. This time, her voice was crystal clear. She said her name was Caroline, and she needed my help. She sounded desperate, terrified. Before I could respond, she told me I had to find Detective Hopkins at the Miami Police Department. She said I had to tell him the gun was in the vent in the bedroom, and the body was on Highway 41, mile marker 21. She said I had to tell him tonight, or it would be too late. I stood frozen, my mind racing. I asked her what she meant. She only said, "Trust me." Then the call ended. I just stood there, staring at my phone. Miami Police Department? I lived north of Atlanta. Everything in me screamed that this wasn't my problem and that I should just forget about it. But there was something about her voice, something so raw, so desperate, that I couldn't ignore. I sighed and dialed the Miami Police Department. After several minutes on hold, I finally got through to Detective Hopkins. I told him everything. There was a long silence. Then, in a cold, flat tone, he asked if I thought this was funny. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. After another pause, he took my information and told me he'd be in touch. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, my phone rang. This time, it was Hopkins. He told me I needed to come to Miami immediately. I didn't know what to expect, but something about his voice told me it was serious. I made arrangements, took time off work, and drove down. When I got to the station, Hopkins was waiting for me. He didn't waste time. He asked for my phone, scrolling through the call history. His face darkened when he saw Caroline's name. Then he told me everything. A month ago, Caroline had disappeared. Hopkins had been certain her boyfriend had killed her, but had no evidence, no body, no murder weapon. And Caroline's phone was missing. Then, the night before, after I called with the information, he had gotten a new search warrant. They searched the boyfriend's house again. They found the gun in the vent in the bedroom, just like I told them. Then, they searched Highway 41, mile marker 21. They found Caroline's body. Caroline's boyfriend had recently sold a used iPhone. It was her phone. I sat there, trying to process it all. I finally asked the question that had been gnawing at my mind since the moment I first got that call. If Caroline was dead, who had been calling me? Hopkins just shook his head. He said he'd seen a lot in his years as a detective, but getting a call from a ghost was a first. I drove home the next day in complete silence. To this day, I can't explain it, but I know what I heard, and I know that because of Caroline's calls, her murderer was caught. I never got another strange call after that. I have a story I don't tell many people about. It has stuck with me through the years and makes me look differently at the world to this day. It was the summer of my junior year in high school, and my friends Tom and Mike were over at my place. We spent most of our time playing video games and chatting with girls on the phone. Randomly, Mike brought up a cemetery that he heard about. According to him, people he knew had gone there and experienced some pretty wild stuff. I thought the whole idea was dumb. I mean, I didn't believe in ghosts or any of that nonsense. But after some relentless convincing, they managed to drag me into their plan. A few hours later, armed with flashlights and some snacks, we piled into Mike's car and headed out. The cemetery was about 30 minutes away, and it was literally in the middle of nowhere. As we drove, I realized how remote the cemetery actually was. We'd been driving down this dirt road for miles, and I hadn't seen any people or buildings of any kind. We finally reached the end of the road and parked. Mike said there was a trail nearby that would lead us to the cemetery, so we set off to find it. Eventually, we did. We almost missed it as it was covered in grass and trees. We sat down the trail, both Mike and Tom talking about how they hoped they would get to see a ghost. I rolled my eyes as we continued on the trail. Finally, we could see a clearing. As we walked off the trail, we found it, the cemetery. We got there at what some people would probably call the perfect time, as the sun had just set. We turned our flashlights on and started exploring. Tom and Mike wandered off together, chatting and examining some of the older headstones, while I, already bored, sat down next to a big tree. As I sat there, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through social media, trying to distract myself. I glanced up and I could see Mike and Tom in the distance. The light from their flashlights slowly disappeared behind a hill. I looked back down at my phone and started scrolling again. A few minutes passed when I heard a faint noise behind me. I figured it was Tom or Mike messing around, so I glanced back, but nothing. The sound came again, this time clearer, like a soft rustling or maybe a whisper. It seemed to be coming from one of the nearby graves. I got up, more annoyed than scared, and walked over to where I thought the noise was coming from, but saw nothing. Just as I was about to turn around, I heard it, a child's laugh, faint but unmistakable. I froze, my heart racing. It had to have been Mike or Tom playing a prank on me. I called out to them, but no answer. Then, from right behind me, the laugh sounded again, louder and closer. I whipped around, my flashlight beam moving across the headstones, and there they were, eyes, two glowing child eyes peering at me from behind a headstone. I remember Tom asking me later if I actually saw a head or just eyes. To be honest, I can't remember. The only thing that burned itself into my memory were the eyes of that kid. That was enough for me. I bolted back towards the car, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The eerie laugh echoed behind me as I ran. I didn't dare to look back. When I reached the car, I found Tom and Mike already inside, looking freaked out. They jumped out when they saw me and asked where I'd been. I was stunned. I had been right there in the cemetery the whole time. I asked if they were the ones who had been laughing, but their confused faces told me they weren't. Just as we were piecing our stories together, we all heard it. The same creepy child's laugh, clear as day, coming from the direction of the cemetery. We were out of there. We scrambled into the car and sped off, not stopping until we were back to the safety of my house. We never went back to that cemetery, and to this day, I can't explain what we heard. Maybe it was just a trick of the wind, or maybe, just maybe, there was something out there, something that we weren't meant to see. When I started my new job as a night shift nurse at the hospital, I knew it wouldn't be easy. The long, quiet hours, the eerie stillness of the building at night. It wasn't exactly what I had imagined when I first entered nursing school. But I needed the experience, and working nights was just part of the deal. The first week went smoothly, and since I was still new, I spent most of my time training under Erin, a seasoned nurse who had been working the night shift for years. She was patient, friendly, and knew the ins and outs of the hospital better than anyone. Our wing was one of the older parts of the hospital. The walls had a faded yellowish tint, and the floors creaked in certain places, betraying the building's age. The overhead lights flickered now and then, and sometimes, when the halls were empty, I swore I could hear whispers echoing from somewhere unseen. But I chalked it up to exhaustion and nerves. One thing that did stand out to me, though, was room 324. Unlike the others, its door remained closed at all times. The bed was always neatly made, but never occupied. I asked Erin about it once. She just shrugged and told me they didn't use that room. No real reason. That's just the way things were. I didn't question it. Not then, at least. By the time my second week rolled around, I was feeling more confident. I was beginning to settle into the rhythm of the night shift, checking vitals, administering medications, restocking supplies, assisting patients when they needed help in the middle of the night. The quiet hours gave me time to go over the charts, monitor fluids, and make notes for the day staff. That night, I clocked in as usual and checked the computer to see which patients were in our wing. As I was skimming through the list, something caught my eye. Room 324 was occupied. My stomach twisted slightly. I knew for a fact that room hadn't been used since I started working here. But there it was, Henry Foster, 72 years old. According to his file, he lived alone and had fallen at home, sustaining minor injuries. The doctor wanted to keep him under observations for a couple days. I shook off my unease and started my rounds. Patients needed their medications, charts had to be updated, and vitals had to be checked. An hour passed, and it was time to check on Henry. I approached room 324, hesitating slightly before opening the door. The dim glow from the bedside lamp was the only source of light, casting long shadows against the wall. Henry was awake. He sat up in bed, hands resting on the blanket, staring straight ahead at the far wall. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even acknowledge my presence when I walked in. I introduced myself and told him I'd be taking care of him that night. Nothing, no reaction. I moved closer, pulling up a chair beside his bed, and gently asked if he needed anything. Finally, his gaze shifted to me. His eyes were pale and cloudy, the kind you see in patients who have lived long enough to carry the weight of too many years. After a long pause, he said he would like some water. I got up, filled a cup from the sink, and handed it to him. He took a sip, set it down, and then he asked me where Nora was. I scanned his chart again in my mind. There had been no mention of a Nora. I asked him who she was, and he told me she was his wife. I told him I wasn't sure where she was, but I'd be happy to call her in the morning to let her know that he was asking about her. He nodded, but went right back to staring at the wall. The whole interaction left me unsettled, but I chalked it up to fatigue. Some older patients experienced confusion, especially at night. I stepped out of the room, returning to my duties, administering medications, adjusting IVs, checking vitals. I ran into Erin briefly, but we were too busy to talk much. The night dragged on, and before I knew it, it was time to check on Henry again. I approached room 324 once more, pushing open the door quietly, expecting to find Henry asleep. He wasn't in bed. He stood by the window, staring out into the night. The light from the lamp barely reached him, casting his figure in a strange, elongated shadow across the floor. I stepped closer and asked if he was okay. He didn't turn at first. Then, slowly, he shifted his head towards me, his expression blank. He then said he was waiting for Nora. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I swallowed my unease and told him I promised to call Nora in the morning, but for now he needed to rest. He didn't move. I reached out, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, trying to guide him back to bed. But when I did, he didn't budge. His body was rigid, almost unnaturally stiff. I gave another gentle nudge, and that's when his demeanor changed. His head snapped towards me, his eyes suddenly sharp and filled with something that hadn't been there before. His voice, once quiet and soft, rose into an angry growl as he demanded to know where Nora was. A cold dread settled over me. I tried to de-escalate, telling him that she was on her way, but I barely got the words out before he was in front of me, in a blink. It was almost impossibly fast. Suddenly, I realized that I couldn't breathe. Not like out of fear, like actually unable to breathe. A crushing pressure wrapped around my throat, though nothing was touching me. Panic surged through me as I struggled to inhale, my vision darkening around the edges. Henry's face twisted into something unrecognizable, something not human. The last thing I heard before everything went black was his voice, over and over, demanding to know what I had done to Nora. The next thing I knew, Erin was shaking me, her face pale with concern. A rush of adrenaline hit me and I shot up, gasping for air. Henry was gone. The room was empty. Erin pulled me out into the hallway, away from room 324. I tried to explain what had happened, but before I could, Erin cut me off with a question that made my blood run cold. She asked me if I saw Henry. I nodded, my heart still hammering in my chest. I asked her where he was. Erin took a deep breath before saying something I will never forget. She told me Henry isn't real. I stared at her in disbelief. She told me that room 324 had been abandoned for a reason. Over the years, multiple staff members had reported seeing an old man named Henry inside the room, always asking for his wife Nora. The stories varied, but they all shared the same eerie thread. Henry wasn't a patient. Henry had never been a patient. I ran to the files. There was no record of Henry Foster. I logged into the computer. Room 324 had never been occupied. It was impossible. I had seen him, spoken to him, felt him. For the next 6 months, I stayed at the hospital, but I never set foot in room 324 again, and I never saw Henry either. But even now, I wonder, was he just a lost soul lingering in a place that he had once been? Or was there something much darker waiting inside room 324? When I was 4, we lived in an old but charming farmhouse in the country. The house had creaky wooden floors, tall windows that let in the morning sun, and a wraparound porch that my parents loved. A few hundred yards away on our property was a small pond. My parents always warned me to stay away from it, saying that it wasn't safe for little kids. I actually liked to think that I was a well-behaved child, so I listened to my parents and never went there. One sunny afternoon, I was playing outside, lost in my own world, when a little boy appeared out of nowhere. He was around my age with curly brown hair and a mischievous smile. He asked if I wanted to play at the pond. I hesitated, remembering my parents' warnings, but for some reason I decided to go with him. Together we ran to the pond, laughing and playing simple games like tag and hide and seek. After a while, he waded into the water and motioned me to join him. He was splashing around, laughing and telling me to come in. I was nervous as I remembered my parents telling me it wasn't safe, but he looked like he was having so much fun. Thinking everything looked safe to me, I decided to get in with him. As soon as I stepped into the water, he cheered. I walked a little deeper, the water just below my waist. He walked closer to me and took my hand. He then said, "Now we will be together forever." Before I could react, he pushed me under the water, holding my head under. Panic set in as I struggled to surface, his hand holding me down with surprising strength. Just when I thought I couldn't hold my breath any longer, I felt a strong pair of hands yank me up. It was my dad. He must have noticed I was missing and found me in the pond. Coughing and crying, I couldn't say anything. My dad, while mad but also relieved I was okay, asked me what I thought I was doing and that I could have drowned. I looked at my dad and said the boy was holding me under the water. I turned around to point at him, and to my surprise, he was gone. My dad immediately jumped back into the pond, but never found anyone. My dad called the police and they were there within minutes doing a full search of the pond. After about an hour of looking, no one was ever found. One of the police officers came to me and asked me to explain what happened again and told me to tell him what the boy looked like. I did my best to describe him, and the officer took notes and told my parents that if we saw the boy again, to call back. I looked up at my mom, and she seemed absolutely terrified. I just assumed at the time she was just scared of the whole thing that just happened, but it wasn't until years later that I found exactly why she had that look on her face. It was a few months later we moved away from that house. Our new house was closer to the city in a normal neighborhood. The whole thing really had scared me of the water for a long time, and the thought of my experience wasn't something that I wanted to talk about. It wasn't until years later I was sitting on our porch outside with my parents when I decided to bring it up. I asked them if they had remembered when I almost drowned, trying to be funny. My parents exchanged looks at each other and said of course they did. I then asked I wonder what ever happened to that little boy who tried to kill me. Again, my parents exchanged worried glances at each other, but didn't say anything. At this point, I could realize there was something they weren't telling me. I questioned them about it and they tried to push it off and change the subject. I immediately stopped this from happening and point blank asked them if they knew what happened to that little boy. Again, my parents exchanged glances and my dad nodded to my mom. My mom sighed and said they had been keeping something from me, but if I thought I was ready, they would tell me. I said I wanted to know. They told me before I was born they had a son. His name was Corey. He was so full of life and loved the outdoors. It was the reason they had bought the old farmhouse, so Corey could grow up in nature and away from the city. One day, my dad noticed Corey wasn't playing in the backyard where he last saw him. Growing worried, my dad started looking around the yard. Eventually, my dad ended up at the pond where he found Corey, floating in the water. My mom started crying. My dad then comforted her and said that the boy I described seeing at the pond sounded exactly like Corey. My dad got up and went into the house. He came back a few minutes later and handed me a picture. "This is Corey," he said. The realization hit me like a cold wave. The boy at the pond, my mysterious playmate, was my brother. Looking at this picture, it was a spitting image of the boy I saw at the pond that day, the boy who tried to kill me. Even now, I can still see his mischievous smile, waving for me to join him in the pond. Then I remembered him saying, "Now we can be together forever." Everything fit together. To this day, I'll never know if that boy was the ghost of my brother and why he would have tried to hurt me. I would like to think that my brother would never do that to me, but honestly, I don't have any other explanation. I don't hold any ill will against my brother though, and I hope that he has finally found peace. I'm a photographer for a national magazine, so I'm used to traveling for work. Usually I stay in hotels, but this time I decided to try something different. I was covering a hot air balloon festival, and the nearest hotel was a good 30 minutes away from the site. So I figured I'd stay a little closer and booked an Airbnb not too far from the festival grounds. When I arrived, the place looked decent enough. A little 2-bedroom house tucked away off the road. The owner had left a key in the mailbox just like they said they would. I grabbed it, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The house was simple but fine, cozy even. I unpacked my stuff, set up my laptop on the kitchen table to make sure everything was ready for the shoot the next day, then headed to bed. I must have passed out as soon as I hit the pillow, but around 2 a.m. I woke up suddenly for no apparent reason. Groggy, I checked my phone, nothing. I rolled over trying to get comfortable when I felt it, the distinct pressure of someone sitting down on the bed next to me. I jumped, literally falling out of the bed, heart racing. I fumbled to switch on the light, but the room was empty. The bed was empty. I stood there for a minute, staring at the mattress, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I told myself I must have been dreaming or half asleep, but I shook it off and eventually crawled back into bed. The next day went great. The festival was incredible. Colorful balloons filling the sky, perfect photo ops everywhere. I spent the entire day shooting, interviewing a few people for the article, and by the time I got back to the Airbnb, I was wiped out. I barely had the energy to change clothes before collapsing into bed. It didn't take long to fall asleep, but once again, I woke up in the middle of the night. This time, I didn't even look at my phone. I just turned on the bedside lamp and glanced around the room. Everything looked fine. I turned the light back off, sighed, and tried to settle down. But then, as I lay there, I got this strange sensation. I can't explain it, but it felt like someone was watching me. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the feeling got. My eyes were shut tight, telling myself to go to sleep, but I just couldn't take it anymore. Slowly, I opened my eyes, and that's when I saw it. A face, inches from mine, just floating there, staring at me. I screamed and rolled out of bed, scrambling to get away. I slammed into the wall, clawing at the light switch. When the room was flooded with light, the face was gone. But I knew what I had seen. It wasn't a dream this time. Something was in that house. I didn't waste any time. I threw my things into my bag, grabbed my gear, and ran out of that place as fast as I could. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I got in my car and drove until I found the nearest hotel. To this day, I try to convince myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I know it wasn't. Something was there. Something not of this world. And I will never forget it. I was a cop for nearly 30 years, patrolling the streets of one of the largest cities in the country. You see a lot in that line of work. Things that stay with you, haunt you. I'd witnessed the depths of human depravity, cruelty that defied reason, but I could always find a way to explain it, make sense of it somehow. Until one call came in, a call that defied all logic, a call I still can't explain. It was a quiet night, one of those rare moments when the city seemed to hold its breath. I was driving with my partner Jack. We'd been on the force together for years. We knew the routine, the dance of danger and duty that played out each shift. We were about to call it a night when the dispatch crackled over the radio. A neighbor reported screams coming from a house on a rough side of town. They weren't sure if it was an assault or something worse, but they wanted someone to check it out. Jack glanced at me. He said we should probably take this one, and I nodded. I told dispatch we'd check it out and call if we need to back up. We flipped on the sirens and sped towards the address. As we pulled up to the house, everything seemed still. The streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavements, and an eerie silence settled over the neighborhood. Jack got out and went around the side of the house while I approached the front door. I knocked loudly, announcing that we were police, but there was no response. I knocked again, harder this time, and the porch light flicked on. The door creaked open, and an older woman peeked out. She looked frail, her eyes wide with fear. I introduced myself and told her we had gotten a call of someone potentially in distress. I then told her we would need to check out the area. She shook her head. She said everything was fine, but I could tell she was lying. I'd seen that look way too many times before. Jack joined me on the porch, and I tried again. I told her that if there was anyone inside that was hurt or trying to hurt her, we could help. Before she could respond, a scream erupted from deep within the house, a scream that didn't sound human. My gaze went from the woman and back to Jack. I drew my gun, looking at the woman. She started to cry, pleading with us. She said, "You don't understand. You have to leave. Leave now." But there was no way we could just walk away now. I gently pushed her aside and forced the door open. I told the woman to sit on the porch. She didn't fight it. Jack and I stepped inside, guns drawn. The house was dark, shadows lurking in every corner. "Police," I shouted. "If there's anyone here, come out with your hands up." Nothing. The silence was suffocating as we cleared room after room, each one more oppressive than the last. Finally, we reached a door at the end of a long hallway. I could feel something was off, like a cold draft seeping through the cracks. I looked at Jack, and he nodded. I reached for the doorknob, but it was locked from the inside. I yelled if they didn't come to the door, I was gonna come in. No response. I kicked the door with all my might, and it flew open. Inside, an old man lay on the bed, staring up at the ceiling with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. His pupils were so dilated they looked like black holes, and his mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. I asked him if he was alright, lowering my weapon just slightly. He didn't respond, but his eyes flicked towards me, sending a shiver down my spine. Then he chuckled, a low, guttural sound that didn't seem to belong to a human being. "Hello, Christopher," he said in a voice that, well, honestly, I don't even know how to describe it. Let's just say it wasn't his voice. My heart stopped. How did he know my name? I'd never seen this man in my life before. Before I could react, he sprang up from the bed with an unnatural speed, landing on the floor in a crouch. Jack and I stepped back, our guns aimed at him. He turned his head towards me, tilting in a way that seemed to defy anatomy. "Do you have a message for your sister?" he asked, his voice dripping with malice. I'd be happy to deliver it to her. I stood there, unable to move. My sister. I hadn't spoken of her in years. She struggled with her mental health and had taken her own life a few years back. She tried to call me before she did it, but I was on duty, too busy to answer. It's a regret that's haunted me ever since. But how could he possibly know about that? I felt tears well up in my eyes, a mix of fear and guilt washing over me. I backed into the wall, my mind racing. Jack was now shouting, demanding the man get on the ground. The man looked at Jack. "Oh, Jackie," the man said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Your wife would be so disappointed if she knew about Sabrina." Jack's face turned white. He looked at me, panic in his eyes. The man laughed again, a chilling, inhuman sound that echoed the room. Then, his body began to contort, his limbs bending at impossible angles. We watched in horror, paralyzed by the grotesque display, and then, as suddenly as it started, he collapsed onto the floor, motionless. I snapped out of it and radioed for backup and an ambulance. As the medics wheeled the old man out, I saw the woman sitting on the couch, her face streaked with tears. I approached her, unsure of what to say. She looked up at me with a sorrowful expression. "I told you not to go back there," she whispered. I couldn't bring myself to respond. "It's the devil, you know," she continued, her voice barely audible. I stared at her, a chill running down my spine. Later, I found out the name Jackie was what Jack's mother used to call him. He admitted to an affair with a woman named Sabrina, something I'd never known about. We never spoke of that night again, but I knew, deep down, that we had come face to face with something beyond our understanding. Something evil, and as much as I tried to rationalize it, to fit it into the framework of logic and reason I'd built my life around, I knew there was no explanation. It was the devil, and I'd looked him in the eye. I grew up in a small town. It was one of those towns you get stuck in. When I graduated high school, the first thing I did was move away. It was more than a decade later when I got the call that my mom was diagnosed with dementia. With me being the only child she had, and my father passing away when I was young, she had no one else to take care of her. I made the decision to move back to my hometown to take care of my mom. Moving her to the much bigger city I lived in would not have been good for her, so I swallowed my pride and went back home. I got moved in pretty smoothly, and my mom was happy to have me back home. Her doctors even commented on how much better she had been since I was back. I knew I'd be here for a while. I needed to find work that allowed me the flexibility to look after her. Just a block down the road from my mother's house was an old appliance repair shop. The owner, a man I knew from my younger years, Charlie, was more than happy to hire me and work around my schedule. A month after working with Charlie, things were going smoothly. I took a lot off Charlie's plate, and in return he was incredibly flexible with my hours and allowed me to spend time with my mom. One day, while swamped with repairs, I got a call from my mom. She was upset and needed me to come home. I told Charlie, and he told me to go home. He didn't say it, but I could tell me leaving added a lot of stress to his day. I hated leaving him like that, but I needed to be with my mom. I spent the next few hours with my mom, calming her down and making sure she was comfortable. When she finally went to bed, I figured I could head back to the shop and finish the work I had left undone. It was getting dark, but I figured I wouldn't have to worry about customers coming in and out, so I should be able to focus. I called Charlie to let him know I was going to the shop to finish up some of the jobs, but he insisted I leave it for tomorrow. I figured he was just worried about my mom. However, he had done so much for me, I wanted to return this small favor. I let myself into the shop and got to work. The main workspace was a large open room with benches along the walls. About an hour in, deep into a repair, the light bulb for the room went out. Thinking the bulb had blown, I grabbed a spare. I went back to the switch to turn it off before changing the bulb. Then I realized that the light switch was in the off position. I guess that I must not have flipped the switch all the way to on and it just slowly slipped back down to off. Shrugging my shoulders, I decided it was nothing and went back to work. About 15 minutes went by and I was lost in my task when the light went off again. This time, I immediately turned to the switch, half expecting to see someone, but no one was there. I walked over, flipped it back on, and called out, thinking Charlie might have been playing a joke. There was no response. I walked around the shop, looking to see if anyone was there, but nothing. Feeling a little uneasy, I wanted to finish my work and leave. I positioned myself so I could see the switch while working, glancing at it every few moments. One of the times I glanced over at the switch, something caught my eye. At first I didn't realize what I was looking at, but when I did, I screamed. I saw this bony hand with what looked to be rotting flesh falling off the bone, coming from the other side of the wall, and moving towards the light switch. My screaming had no effect on the hand's movement, and it slowly moved a bony finger on the light switch and flipped it off. Still screaming, I stumbled backwards and bolted out of the shop, locking the door behind me. I ran back home, locking my door and collapsing on the couch, trying to catch my breath. I had no idea what I had just seen, but it wasn't human. Not a living one anyway. The next day, I told Charlie everything. He just laughed, saying he had told me not to go there. He explained that he always left before sunset because of the strange things that happened. He didn't know what it was, but it liked to come out after dark. After that night, I never stepped foot in the shop after dark again. Some things are better left undisturbed. The cenotes were supposed to be the highlight of my trip to Tulum. I'd been looking forward to it for months, imagining the pictures I'd take, the crystalline water, the lush jungle. It felt like the perfect escape from the stress of school, and as a photographer, I couldn't wait to capture the beauty of all of it. But now, sitting in my dim apartment, staring at my cracked camera, I can't think about the trip without shivering. Something happened there. Something I can't explain. That day started out as one of those days you couldn't dream up any better. Ella, Ashley, and I devoured a resort breakfast that tasted as incredible as it looked. Pancakes, fresh fruit, and juices so sweet they might as well have been desserts. Afterwards, we met up with a group of about 20 people to head to a privately owned cenote. I'd seen photos of it online, hidden away in the jungle, a natural wonder preserved in perfect isolation. The bus ride was a blur of excitement. Ashley was scrolling through Instagram, showing us influencers who had been there, while Ella quizzed the tour guide about the area. The air buzzed with anticipation. When we arrived, I felt like I'd stepped into another world. The jungle seemed to breathe around us, vibrant and alive. The cenote itself was everything I'd imagined and more. The water was so clear that you could see straight to the bottom, and the sunlight filtered through the trees in golden beams. I snapped photos nonstop on the way down the trail, trying to capture the way the leaves danced in the breeze. As the group gathered near the water, our guide Carlos began to talk about the history of the cenotes. He explained how they were sacred to the Maya, believed to be gateways to the underworld. Xibalba, the land of the dead. They perform rituals here, even sacrifices, he told us. It was hard to imagine something so dark in a place so beautiful. That's when I saw it, a cave entrance, roped off and tucked into the side of the cenote. Carlos must have noticed me staring at it. His voice shifted slightly, from casual to serious. One of the rules for visiting this property is that no one goes into the caves, he said. Someone asked him why not. Carlos hesitated, then smiled, like he was trying to brush off the question. The official reason is safety. It is easy to get lost or injured down there. But the truth, he lowered his voice, the family who owns this land is very superstitious. They believe this cave leads directly to Xibalba. They say if you go too deep, you might not come back. Some people laughed nervously, but I almost couldn't stop staring at the dark opening. It was almost magnetic. Ashley leaned over to me, catching my gaze. "Don't even think about it," she whispered. I smirked, brushing her off. I wasn't. Obviously, I lied. The next few hours were incredible. We swam in the cenote, laughing and diving into the cool water. I took pictures of Ashley and Ella floating in the sunlit pool, the jungle creating a perfect frame around them. But no matter how much fun we had, my eyes kept drifting back to the cave. It was like it was calling me, pulling me in. During lunch, Carlos mentioned a hiking trail that led to a hill with a panoramic view of the jungle. Most of the group wanted to go, including Ashley and Ella. I saw my chance. I told Ella and Ashley that I was going to stay, that I'd eaten too much food. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I was actually skipping a photo op. I shrugged and told them I'd got plenty of pictures already. Once I watched the group disappear around the corner, I grabbed my camera and walked casually towards the cave. The older couple sitting nearby didn't even glance up from their sandwiches, and the kid glued to his video game didn't notice me at all. The rope was easy enough to duck under. As soon as I stepped inside, the temperature dropped. The floor sloped downward, the ground rough beneath my bare feet. I turned on my phone flashlight, the beam cutting through the growing darkness. The cave was enormous, pools of water shimmering faintly in the pale light, their surfaces smooth and glassy. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, their tips glittering. It was hauntingly beautiful, like something out of a dream. I raised my camera and started shooting. The sound of the shutter echoed faintly, almost as a whisper. Then I felt it, a cold breeze, unnatural and sharp. It made me freeze. My flashlight wavered as I turned, scanning the cavern, and that's when I heard it. A voice, faint, indecipherable, but undeniably human. I called out, my voice trembling. I asked if anyone was there. No answer. I stepped towards the sound, my camera ready. That's when I saw him. He was sitting on a rock by one of the pools, dressed in what looked like traditional Mayan clothing. His frame was so thin, it looked like his bones might tear through his skin. He stared into the water, unmoving. I lifted my camera, my instincts kicking in. The lens clicked, the flash momentarily lighting up the cavern, and then he turned. His face was skeletal, empty eye sockets, a jaw hanging open as if an eternal scream. My breath caught in my throat as he let out an inhuman wail, the sound reverberating through the cave. He stood and began to move towards me, impossibly fast. I ran. The uneven ground made every step treacherous, but I didn't dare stop. His footsteps echoed behind me, closer and closer. I could hear his groaning, feel the chill of his presence at my back. I reached the steps and scrambled up, my legs burning. As I neared the entrance, I dared to glance back. He was at the bottom of the steps, staring up at me. His hollow eyes seemed to pierce straight through me. Then, in an instant, he was gone, vanished into the shadows. I burst out of the cave, tripping over the rope and tumbling headfirst into the cenote. The water shocked me back to my senses, cold and biting. I surfaced gasping, clutching my camera to my chest. When Ashley and Ella returned, I told them everything. They laughed, shaking their heads, not believing a word I said. But when I got home, I had the camera repaired. I couldn't stop thinking about the photo I'd taken. When I finally saw it, my fear came flooding back, as if I were back in the cave again. The man wasn't sitting in the photo, though. He was standing directly in front of the lens, his skull-like face filling the frame. And that's when I realized the truth. Xibalba isn't a myth, and I had stepped into its domain, and I had met its gatekeeper. Growing up, my parents made a living by buying old houses, remodeling them, and turning them into rental properties. By the time I was 20, they had dozens of these properties and were quite well off. I spent most of my free time with them, helping with remodels, and I loved every second of it. I learned how to do almost everything myself, from plumbing to carpentry. While I loved helping my parents with their properties, I wanted to branch out on my own and start doing my own house remodels. With some savings and a little help from my parents, I had finally enough to put a down payment on my first project. An old 3-story house from the early 1900s. The house was beautiful despite its age, at least in my eyes. It was located in the middle of a small town, so it had that rural vibe, but was close enough to all the necessities such as food and gas, the perfect place for a rental. The price was almost too good to be true, but the catch was I couldn't do an inspection beforehand and the sale was final. Confident in my abilities to fix anything, I signed the papers and got the keys. The first thing I did was walk through the house, envisioning the work to be done. The floors needed replaced, plumbing fixed, walls painted, and so on. Despite its worn condition, I could see the potential in every room. I decided to start with the kitchen and living room. For 2 weeks, I commuted from my parents' house that was about an hour away. It was exhausting, but the progress was rewarding. It was slowly coming together. I knew I'd make faster progress if I didn't spend the extra time going back and forth from my parents' house to the new property, so I decided to just move in. I moved a basic bedroom set and supplies into one of the smaller bedrooms, planning to work on the master bedroom next. The room I chose was small, with peel-in wallpaper and a single small window. I figured once I finished the master bedroom, I could just move into that. That first night, exhausted from working, I collapsed into bed and fell asleep. A few hours later, I suddenly woke up, but was unsure why. Groggy, I grabbed my phone to use its flashlight and scan the room. To my horror, In the corner stood a girl with pale skin and sunken eyes, staring right at me. Paralyzed with fear, I could barely move, let alone scream. Still looking at me, she said the words, "Help me, he won't let me out." I was finally able to yell. I dropped my phone and scrambled for the light switch. When I flipped it on, she was gone, as if nothing was ever there. My heart was racing. Did I just have a nightmare? I spent the rest of the night in my truck, too scared to go back inside. The next morning, I searched the house but found no one. Embarrassed and convinced it had all been a dream, I threw myself back into work. But that night, the thought of the girl and her coming back haunted me, even if it was just a dream. Too scared to sleep in the bedroom, I dozed off on the couch in the living room. I had finished remodeling this area, so it felt safer and more familiar. Once again, seemingly for no reason, I woke up. The TV was still on, casting a light across the room. The TV light lit the room up just enough for me to tell that I was alone, no creepy girl. Feeling relieved, I went to the kitchen to get a drink of water before going back to bed. I walked into the kitchen and fumbled for the light switch. When I found it, I flipped it on. When the light came on, there she was, the same girl from last night, standing in the kitchen. I screamed, both in fright and in anger. I yelled at her asking who she was and why she was in my house. She looked at me completely emotionless. There was a brief moment when I stopped yelling. She slowly raised her hand and pointed at the door. The door that she was pointing at was the door that led to the basement. I had been down there a couple times, but it was probably the area in the house I had been in the least. Still pointing at the door, she said just above a whisper, "He won't let me out." Before I could react, the kitchen light bulb exploded with a loud pop and an unearthly scream echoed from the basement. Terrified, I ran from the kitchen, falling over everything in my mad scramble to get out of that house as quickly as I could. I ran to my truck, locked myself in, and called my dad. I was so shaken I could barely explain to him what had just happened. He told me that he was on his way. About an hour later, my dad finally arrived. Together we went back into the house. My dad checked around the living room and saw nothing. It was just as I left it. We then went to the kitchen. The light wouldn't turn on, confirming to my dad that that part of the story actually happened. He then walked over to the basement door, opened it, and he slowly descended the stairs. The basement wasn't really that big. It was maybe 30 by 30 feet, and the room was pretty open. We looked around the entire room and saw nothing out of the ordinary. We were just about to leave when we heard a slight knocking sound that came from one of the corners of the room. We walked closer and saw a tool bench. My dad glanced around, trying to see if he could find the source of the sound. He peered behind the bench and then shouted at me. I walked closer and he said there was something behind the bench. Together, we pulled the bench away from the wall, revealing a very small, crawl space looking door. After getting the door fully revealed, I immediately noticed something was off. This door was metal, and it had a large, heavy-duty lock on it. My dad then said we should cut the lock open and see what was inside. I started to protest as he was looking around for something to cut it open with. However, we both stopped and heard 3 quiet but very distinct knocks coming from behind the door. We both looked at each other in horror. We bolted upstairs and immediately called the police. The police were quick to arrive, however they didn't hear any of the knocking sounds. They also couldn't get the lock open either. They eventually had to bring in the fire department to get the door open. While I didn't actually get to see what was inside, they did find the skeletal remains of a woman. They were not sure how long she had been dead, but guessed at least 15 years. The police never figured out who she was or who killed her, at least to my knowledge. I never saw that ghostly figure again. I did finish the remodel, but I never stayed the night, and my dad paid a lot of money for the work to be contracted out so I didn't have to do it alone. The house sat empty for 2 years before someone finally bought it. In the end, I lost a lot of money on that house. I hope that poor girl's soul can finally move on after we found her body. I hope I never have any sort of experience like this ever again. That Halloween was one I'll never forget. A few years back, I had just moved to a new city for work. The job was going great and my coworkers were friendly, always inviting me to lunch or drinks after work. After about 4 months, I felt like I was finally settling in. So when they invited me to a Halloween party one of them was hosting, I immediately said yes. I didn't want to seem antisocial. The host said costumes weren't necessary, which was a relief because I didn't have one. Halloween came around, and after work, I went home, showered, and threw on my usual clothes before heading to the party. To my surprise, I had a great time, better than I expected, but when I glanced at my watch, it was already past midnight. I had to be up early for work, and it looked like others were starting to leave too, so I made my rounds, said my goodbyes, and headed for my car. The party was in the city, but I lived in a quieter suburb about 20 minutes away. One of the roads home was a long, forested stretch that always felt more like the middle of nowhere than a suburb. A few minutes into the drive, something caught my eye. A girl, standing on the side of the road. She was young, dressed in a pale blue dress, and looked out of place given how late it was. I stopped and rolled my window down. I asked her if she was okay. I was a little unnerved by how still she was being. She nodded slowly and said that she was just trying to get home. I asked where she lived, and she mentioned an address that was just across from my neighborhood. I couldn't leave her out there, so I offered her a ride. She nodded again, and then got in without another word. The silence was thick as we drove, and I tried to make small talk to ease the tension. I asked her what her name was. She quietly responded Susan. When she spoke, she never looked at me, just kept staring straight, keeping her eyes on the road. I introduced myself and tried to figure out where she had come from. Her dress looked old-fashioned, like something from another time. I asked if she'd been to a Halloween party, and she said no, that she was walking home from school. That threw me off. School? At this hour? I asked her where her parents were. She said that they were waiting for her at home. Again, her tone was flat and emotionless. It didn't make any sense, but before I could ask anything else, we had arrived at the street she'd mentioned. I slowed down, scanning the old mailboxes until I saw the number she'd given me. The house was ancient, practically crumbling. It looked abandoned. I asked her if this was her house. She nodded, and for the first time since getting in the car, turned to look at me. She thanked me softly before getting out and walking towards the house. I watched her as she approached the door, waiting to make sure she made it inside safely. But then my phone buzzed, and I glanced down at my screen. It was Cody from work, checking to see if I got home safely. I quickly typed out a reply, telling him that I had a slight detour as I found a girl on the side of the road and had just dropped her off at her house. When I looked back up from my phone, she was gone. I blinked, thinking that she must have gone inside without me noticing. After a moment, I shrugged it off, I did a U-turn, and headed home. The next day at work, Cody came over to my desk laughing about how wild the party had been. A few others joined in, and soon enough, the topic turned to the girl I'd taken home. I started telling them how strange the situation had been, how she said her parents were waiting for her but wore this outdated dress. Everyone went silent, staring at me like I had 3 heads. Then, Coasty burst out laughing. He started saying that I'd almost got him. I just stared at him, confused. I asked him what he was talking about. He responded saying that it was just like their local ghost legend. I shook my head, completely lost. Cody's smile faltered, and he exchanged a glance with the others before continuing. He then told me there was an urban legend where a girl named Susan was on her way home from school. As she was walking on the side of the road, someone had hit her and then drove away. Cody continued by saying the legend says that now the girl walks on the side of the road, waiting for someone to pick her up and take her home. The blood drained from my face. I told him to stop messing with me, but I could tell Cody was actually being serious now. Later that night, I drove back to the house. I went and knocked on the door, but no one answered. I researched and found out that no one had owned that house in a long time. Had I really given a ride to a ghost? I still don't know for sure, but I'll never forget that Halloween. People say that I made this story up, that I've let my imagination get the better of me. But they weren't there. They didn't experience what I did. They don't wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing every night like I do. This story, as unbelievable as it sounds, haunts me to this day. It all started a few years ago, during my junior year of college. I'd finally decided it was time to move out of the dorms and get my own place. After months of searching, I found the perfect spot. A small studio apartment just off campus. It was practically new, still had the fresh paint smell, and it was within walking distance of my classes. I got lucky. The person who was supposed to take it backed out at the last second, and I swooped in. But moving out of the dorms meant I needed furniture, lots of it. Coming from a shared dorm room, I had next to nothing. Craigslist became my best friend. I managed to furnish the entire apartment for just a few $100s. The last thing I needed was a dresser. I had a decent-sized closet, but I wanted something to store my folded clothes in. I scoured Craigslist for weeks, always missing out on the good deals. Finally, I had found an ad for a free dresser. It wasn't big, but it was just what I needed. The picture showed it was old and a bit worn, but with a little cleaning up, I thought it could be really pretty. I messaged the seller immediately, and to my surprise, it was still available. The seller explained that their grandmother had recently passed away and that they were clearing out some of the stuff from her garage. They said the dresser was sitting in front and I could just come pick it up anytime. Excited, I jumped in my SUV and headed straight to the address. Sure enough, when I got there, the dresser was sitting right out in front of the garage, just like the seller had said. It looked exactly like the picture, old and worn, but with some potential. Not wanting to linger in someone else's driveway, I quickly loaded it into my car and headed back to my apartment. Once home, I carried the dresser into my bedroom and placed it against the wall opposite of my bed. It seemed like the perfect spot. I opened the drawers to check them out, making sure they were all still functional. The top 2 drawers slid out easily, but when I got to the bottom one, it wouldn't budge. Curious, I looked closer and noticed that the drawer was nailed shut. This struck me as odd. Why would someone nail a drawer shut? Not having many tools, I grabbed the only thing I had, a hammer. I tried to pull the nails out, but they were rusted and stubborn, so I used the hammer to pry the drawer open. After a few hard pulls, the drawer finally popped open. Inside, I found something unexpected. A small, old, handheld mirror. It was beautiful despite its age, with intricate silver detailing around the edges. It looked like it had been expensive at one time. I couldn't help but wonder why it had been locked away, but I didn't dwell on it. I placed the mirror on top of the dresser and started filling the drawers with clothes. By the time I finished, it was getting dark. I decided to call it a night and started to get ready for bed. As I was changing, I noticed the mirror again. I picked it up, admiring how clear the glass was, considering its age. But as I looked into it, something behind me caught my eye. In the reflection, I saw a woman standing behind me. Her skin was pale as a corpse, and her mouth stretched open in an unnatural, elongated scream. I screamed, dropping the mirror onto the floor as I spun around. But no one was there. The room was empty. I stood there, my heart racing as I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, it had been a long day, right? But when I looked back down at the mirror, I froze. The glass had shattered when it hit the floor. At least, that's what should have happened. But instead, it was back on the dresser, perfectly intact, as if I'd never dropped it. Panic set in. I knew what I'd seen. I wasn't crazy, but I didn't know what to do. My hands trembling, I grabbed the mirror and shoved it back into the bottom drawer, slamming it shut. I sat on the edge of my bed, breathing heavily, staring at the dresser. I had to be imagining things. Maybe I was just tired, stressed out from the move and the start of the new school year. I pulled up my phone and sent a message to the person I got the dresser from. I explained what happened and asked if they knew anything about the mirror. Maybe it was a family heirloom, something they wanted back. I waited, staring at my phone, hoping for a quick response, but nothing came. After what felt like hours, I finally decided to try and sleep. I left the lamp on though. I wasn't about to sleep with the lights off. Somehow, I managed to drift off, but my sleep was anything but restful. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange tapping sound. Groggy, I reached for the lamp switch, but it wouldn't turn on. My heart started racing again. I picked up my phone to check the time, 3:30 a.m. I had a new message from the seller. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The message told me I needed to get as far away from that mirror as possible. They said it had tormented their grandmother for years, and that it was haunted by something evil. They thought their grandmother had finally gotten rid of it, but clearly that wasn't the case. The seller apologized profusely, saying they had no idea it was still around. Terror flooded me. I jumped out of bed and tried to turn on the lamp again, but it was useless. The room was pitch black. Then I heard the tapping sound again, louder this time, like something sharp hitting glass. My heart pounded in my chest as I used my phone's light to scan the room. There was nothing, until my light passed over the bathroom door. I froze. Standing in the doorway was the same woman in the mirror. Her hollow eyes stared straight at me as she brushed her hair, ripping it out in clumps with each stroke. The tapping sound was her hair being ripped out by the brush. She lowered the brush to her side, still looking at me. Then, she screamed. I bolted out of my room, out of my apartment, and into my car. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from that place. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That there's a ghost in my apartment? I messaged the seller again, explaining everything as best as I could. They responded almost immediately, saying they'd come to get the mirror. When they arrived, it was already morning. I met them outside, and they introduced themselves as Nina. I asked her what she had planned to do with the mirror, and she said she had a friend who dealt with things like this and hoped he could help out. Together, we went back into my apartment, turning on every light as we went. Everything seemed normal. When we got to my bedroom, I hesitated at the door, but Nina nodded, and I slowly opened it. The room was just as I had left it, and the mirror was lying on top of the dresser, untouched. Nina carefully wrapped the mirror in a towel. She apologized again, saying that she had no idea the mirror was still around. I watched as she put the mirror in her car and drove away. But as I watched her leave, I saw something in the back seat that made my blood run cold. The woman from the mirror was staring back at me. I never heard from Nina again, and part of me is glad. I don't know whatever happened to her or that mirror. I just hope, wherever it is, that it's gone for good. My life returned to normal after that, but the memory of those few days still haunt me. I still can't look into a mirror without fearing what I might see behind me. My name is Jennie, and I remember that Halloween like it was yesterday. I must have been around 14 or 15, that awkward age where trick-or-treating wasn't cool anymore, but I also wasn't old enough to drive or do anything too exciting. It was weird. I didn't want to miss out on Halloween entirely, but I also didn't want to be stuck at home either. Selena, my best friend, suggested that we go to a small Halloween party that one of our classmates was throwing. I wasn't sure about it at first, but it gave me an excuse to dress up, something that I still secretly loved. After all, what's Halloween without costumes? On Halloween, I pulled out my witch costume, classic, I know, but it was always a solid choice. Selena apparently had one just like it, and we just happened to pick the same outfit. We laughed and we both ended up with the same idea and then set out for the party. A few minutes later, we arrived at the guy's house who was throwing the party, Christian. I could hear music and muffled voices inside. We knocked on the door. Christian opened it quickly, dressed as some kind of vampire, and smiled at us. The party itself was small, maybe 10 people hanging out, some sipping beers and others playing games. It wasn't wild, but it seemed fun enough. After some awkward chit-chat and a bit of dancing, Christian came over and asked if we wanted to play a game. Selena and I nodded, and then Christian pulled out a box that made my heart drop. A Ouija board. I immediately shook my head. I had heard too many bad things about those. But Christian tried to convince me. I looked over at Selena, hoping that she'd back me up, but instead, she pulled me aside and told me to stop being a baby, and that it would be fun. Reluctantly, I agreed. I didn't want to look scared in front of Christian, or worse, Selena. So we went to a small back room with Christian and his friend Jack. The room was dimly lit, probably Christian's dad's office, with bookshelves lining the walls. Christian set the board down on the desk, and we all pulled up chairs. He lit a few candles, explaining that we had to keep our hands on the planchette the entire time, and most importantly, we had to say goodbye at the end. We all placed our fingers on the planchette, and Christian began asking questions. Things like, is anyone here with us, and what's your name? For the longest time, nothing happened. I started to relax, thinking Selena had been right. This was just a stupid game people use to scare kids. Then, Jack, being the idiot that he is, blurted out, "Where are all the demons?" Selena giggled, but Christian glared at him. He told Jack not to joke about stuff like that. That's when the planchette moved. It was subtle at first, just a slight twitch. I thought one of them was messing with me. But as it started to glide across the board, quickly spelling out hello, I could feel my pulse quicken. Christian snapped at Jack, telling him to stop messing around, but Jack swore it wasn't him. I looked at Jack and saw the genuine fear in his eyes. Selena laughed, still thinking this was all part of the game, but then Jack stood up, yanking his hand away from the planchette. We all yelled at him, reminding him not to take his hand off. Jack sat back down, muttering something under his breath. Christian immediately suggested we end the session. He told us to say goodbye and move the planchette to goodbye on the board. We all agreed. Christian started to move the planchette to goodbye, but before he could get there, it jerked out of his hands and shot to no. We all screamed. No one was touching the planchette anymore, and it began to move on its own, slowly spelling out something else. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach as I watched it glide across the letters spelling I see you. I bolted out of the chair, Selena close behind me. We didn't stop running until we were back at her house, out of breath and shaking. Neither one of us said a word, but we both knew what we saw. To this day, Christian and Jack swear they weren't messing around with the board. And as for me, I've never touched a Ouija board again. I was 12 the summer my parents sent me to Camp Clearwater. I'd been dreading it. 2 weeks of missing video games and hanging out with my friends sounded like a nightmare. But when I arrived, my grumbling started to fade. The camp had it all. A beach for swimming, endless hiking trails, games, and even a massive obstacle course. The other boys turned out to be pretty cool too. I quickly found myself enjoying it, making new friends and soaking up the summer sun. The first few days flew by. I spent my time swimming, exploring the woods, and joking around with Greg, the guy I clicked with the most. Then came the night everything changed. One of the group leaders, Jake, announced that we'd be hiking into the woods for a special overnight camping trip. He promised to teach us how to pitch tents, build a fire, and navigate by the stars. He even mentioned a round of hide and seek after dinner. I packed my bags with snacks and a flashlight, buzzing with excitement. Greg was going too, which made it even better. The hike was an hour long, but the destination was worth it. We arrived at a secluded spot next to a shimmering lake, the kind of place you'd see on a postcard. We set up 4 tents, with 3 boys in each, while Jake pitched his own nearby. Afterwards, he showed us how to build a fire, while we roasted hot dogs as the sun dipped below the horizon. When dinner was done, Jake announced it was time for hide and seek. One kid was chosen as the seeker, while the rest of us scattered into the woods. Greg and I decided to team up, sprinting up a hill until we found a massive boulder to crouch behind. As we whispered about how much fun we were having, Greg suddenly stopped talking. His eyes drifted past me, focused on something in the distance. I followed his gaze and spotted it, a cabin. It was small and weathered, half hidden by the trees. It looked abandoned, with its roof sagging and broken shutters. I asked Greg if he thought someone lived there. He shrugged and said it didn't look like it. Before we could discuss it further, Jake's voice echoed through the woods, calling us back to the campsite. I glanced over my shoulder at the cabin one last time, before heading back. That night, after Jake showed us the constellations and handed us supplies for s'mores, I asked him about the cabin. He grinned, clearly enjoying the attention as the other campers leaned in. He asked us if we wanted to hear a scary story. We all shouted yes in unison. He laughed and said it would be a scary one. We all got quiet, giving Jake our undivided attention. Jake lowered his voice, his tone turning ominous. A long time ago, a camper got lost in these woods. They stumbled across that cabin and knocked on the door. There was no answer. The lost camper knocked a second time. There was still no answer. The lost camper decided to knock one last and final time. This time, an old lady answered and invited him in. The camper went inside, but they never came back out. They say if you knock on the door 3 times, she'll appear. And if you're not careful, she'll make sure you never leave. He jumped at the end of the story, making everyone scream before laughing nervously. When someone asked him if it was true, he shrugged. He laughed and shook his head. He told us it was just an old shed, so not to worry. Jake then looked at his watch and said it was time for bed. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about that cabin. That's when Greg shook me awake. I looked at him confused and asked him what was wrong. That's when he told me we were going to knock on that cabin door. I hesitated, but eventually gave in. Armed with a flashlight, we crept out of the tent and back up that hill. The cabin looked even creepier at night, its dark windows staring at us like empty eyes. We argued over who should knock first, then decided to do it together. I felt my heart pounding as we knocked once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. We laughed, feeling ridiculous, and turned to leave. But we didn't get a few steps away when we froze. From behind us, we heard a low creaking sound. We turned back. The cabin door was slowly opening. Then, through a grimy window beside the door, I saw her, a hunched figure with wild hair and a twisted smile. Her sunken eyes met mine. Greg screamed, and that broke my paralysis. We ran as fast as we could, not stopping until we burst into the campsite, yelling incoherently. Jake came out of his tent, demanding to know what was going on. We tried to explain, but he just shook his head, scolding us for sneaking off. The next day, Jake claimed he checked the cabin and found nothing. Greg and I weren't convinced. To this day, I don't know who or what we saw. Maybe it was just some homeless person. Or maybe it was the old lady from Jake's story, still waiting for her next visitor. I've worked on a lot of properties over the years. Houses, restaurants, motels, you name it. Some jobs go smooth, some don't. And sometimes you run into customers that are a little different. It comes with the territory. But out of all the strange jobs I've taken, only one truly got under my skin. And it started like any other. Frank's Place. That's the name of the restaurant. It was a small pizza joint that's been around forever. The kind of place families go after a ball game or school recital. Everyone in town knows it. I knew the owner too by reputation, Frank. Always smiling, always friendly. I never really talked to him until he called me about a job. He needed some renovations done, equipment upgrades, a leaking roof patched up, fresh paint, that sort of thing. Straightforward work. He wanted it done in a week and said he'd close the place down so I'd have it to myself. No customers to work around. Honestly, that sounded like a dream. He even paid me half up front. The first couple days were quiet, productive. I got more done than I expected. The place wasn't in bad shape to begin with, just needed some updates. By Tuesday evening, I figured I might actually finish early. It was Wednesday when things started feeling wrong. That afternoon, I was doing prep work for painting in the back hallway. I passed by a small office near the kitchen, heading back to check something on the far end of the building. And that's when I noticed the door. It was heavy duty, steel frame, solid core, and locked up tight with a big industrial padlock. I hadn't noticed it before, and Frank never mentioned the basement, but the way the door stood at the end of the hall, dead center flush against the back wall, it drew my eye immediately. It looked old. The paint around the frame had yellowed, cracked in places. The padlock itself wasn't rusty though. It was newer than the door itself, like it had been placed recently. I don't know why, but I tried the handle out of habit. Locked, obviously. That's when I realized something else. There were marks around the frame, subtle but there. Scratches, like someone had tried to pry it open at some point. Not professionally either. More like something desperate. That door stayed on my mind the rest of the day. I didn't know what was behind it, but it clearly hadn't been opened in a while. Later that afternoon, Frank showed up to check on the progress. He had his usual grin, asking how things were going, cracking a couple harmless jokes. I showed him the new prep station, the patched roof section, and primed walls. He seemed genuinely pleased. As we wrapped up, I casually mentioned the basement door. I told him I didn't know there was one. Just figured I'd check if there's anything that needed to be done down there. His expression changed the second I brought it up. The smile disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. He stared at me for a moment, and I swear, there was something cold behind his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Then he said firmly that the basement wasn't part of the job. He said it was locked for a reason. It was unsafe. He told me that I wasn't to mess with it. I apologized immediately, told him that I was just being thorough. I think he realized he came off a little harsh, because he softened a bit after that. He said he didn't mean to snap at me, but the place was old and the basement wasn't up to code. Mold, exposed wiring, typical stuff. Nothing that I needed to worry about. He left not long after that, and the second he was gone, that strange tension settled in again. I kept thinking about how fast his mood changed, how it didn't feel like he was warning me for my safety, but his own, like he was trying to keep something hidden. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling there was more to it. I even found myself looking up old city records for the building, but there was barely anything listed for that property before the 90s. No floor plans, no permits, just a single mention of substructure access and a zoning note. That was it. The next morning, I was back early. I was trying to focus. I figured I'd push the weirdness out of my head and finish strong. But the mood in the building had shifted. Everything felt heavier, like the air was thicker. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How the hallway lights flickered ever so slightly. How the sound in the back corridor seemed muffled, like the walls were swallowing it. At one point, I was touching up some trim when I heard something behind me. Not loud, just a soft creak of a floorboard in the hallway. I assumed it was Frank and called out to him, but no one responded. I walked back there expecting to see him, but the hallway was empty. Still, I felt like someone had just been there. You know that weird sense when someone's watching you? I had it full force. Then, just as I turned my head back, click, a faint sound behind me. I whipped around, the basement door, still shut, still locked. But that sound, it was the unmistakable click of a latch sliding into place. I approached it again, tried the handle, locked. The padlock looked untouched, but I knew I heard it. I stood there for a long time, hand on the doorknob, trying to convince myself I was tired, maybe hearing things. But there was something about that door, like it was waiting for someone to try again. Frank showed up again that afternoon. Said he had some work to do in the back and would be around for a while. I wanted to bring up what I heard, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about how I reacted the first time I mentioned the basement, so I kept my mouth shut. He disappeared down the hallway with a wave and that big smile. It was sometime around mid-afternoon when I heard it. I had been back to painting, trying to finish off the trim in the dining room, when a sound broke through the soft whir of the ceiling fan. Crying. Faint, but unmistakable. It wasn't just any crying either. It sounded like a girl. Soft, broken sobs that wavered in and out, like they were coming through a wall. I stopped what I was doing and listened. There was no one else in the dining room. I hadn't seen anyone come in, and as far as I knew, it was still just me and Frank in the building. The crying came again, clearer now. I stepped through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The sound was coming from further back, down the hallway. My stomach turned as I made my way towards it. The hallway was dimmer than usual, the single overhead bulb buzzing faintly. And the crying, it was coming from behind the basement door. I stood there for a long moment, just listening. The sadness in that voice, it wasn't casual or theatrical. It was real. I turned around and walked quickly back to the office. Frank was sitting at his desk, working on something at his computer. His calmness almost felt surreal after what I just heard. I asked him directly if he had heard anything. He turned towards me, his face blank at first. Then he blinked, tilted his head a little, like he didn't understand the question. He said no, that he hadn't heard anything. The crying had stopped. I stood there, unsure of what to say, feeling like the air had gone thin around me. Something about his tone unsettled me. There was no curiosity in it, no concern. Just a flat dismissal, like the whole moment had passed and I was wasting time. Frank looked at me for a second longer, then said I should go home, take the rest of the day off. He said that I looked tired, that I should get some rest and finish up tomorrow. I nodded and left, but something in me twisted the whole drive home. I couldn't shake it. That night I went straight to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my thoughts racing. Was I going crazy? Imagining sounds? Why was that basement door bothering me so much? Why would a man like Frank, so open and friendly, become a different person the second that door was mentioned? Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. I don't know how long I was asleep when I woke up, but it wasn't the sun or any sound that did it. It was something else, an instinct. like my brain tugged me out of sleep without knowing why. I looked around the room. It was quiet, still. I got up to go to the bathroom, still groggy. Everything seemed normal until I came back. I froze in the doorway. There, sitting at the end of my bed, was a woman. She looked to be in her mid-20s, dressed in a thin white nightgown that clung to her like it was damp. Her skin was pale, her long dark hair matted and slightly tangled. But what got me the most was her eyes. She was staring straight at me, expressionless, unblinking. I stood there, heart thundering in my chest. I opened my mouth to yell, ask who she was, what she was doing in my house. But she didn't react, didn't move. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, strained, like she had been crying for hours. She told me I had to save her. I didn't understand. Save her from what? Then she said something I'll never forget. She told me the answers were in the basement. I lunged for the light switch, flipped it on. The room lit up, and she was gone. There was nothing on the bed, nothing in the room. I stood there for what felt like forever, breathing hard, sweat cold on the back of my neck. Had I imagined her? Was I dreaming? Hallucinating? No matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, one thing stuck with me. She had mentioned the basement. She knew. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in bed until the sky outside my window started to brighten. And when the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. I got dressed, grabbed my gear, and drove back to Frank's place. As I pulled up, my stomach tightened. There, standing behind the front window, barely visible through the glass, was her. The same woman, the same face. She was real. I walked in, passed through the empty dining area, and made my way back to the back hallway. My footsteps echoed differently that morning. Everything felt still. I pulled out my bolt cutters. The lock on the basement door came off with a hard snap. I opened the door. The air changed immediately. It was cold, thick, the kind of heavy, oppressive air you only feel underground. I could barely see down the staircase, but I started down anyway, one slow step at a time. At the bottom, I found myself in a wide-open chamber. The walls were rough stone, old and damp, with strange black markings etched into them, symbols I didn't recognize. Dozens of melted candles lined the floor and led up to a raised platform in the center of the room. Atop it sat an altar. Dark stains covered the stone slab. The air smelled like copper and mildew. Chain shackles hung from rusted hooks in the walls. Animal bones littered the floor. But they weren't all animal. Tattered robes lay in a heap in the corner, like whoever wore them had simply vanished. But what made me turn and run wasn't the symbols or the bones or the smell. It was the shape on the altar. A human form, covered in a black sheet, motionless. I didn't lift the sheet. I couldn't. I just ran. I got back in my truck, peeled out of the parking lot, and drove straight to the police station. I told them everything, every detail. They sent officers out to investigate, but according to their report, there was nothing there. No basement door, no altar, no body. They said the basement didn't exist. They said the restaurant was locked up tight. I knew then something deeper was at play. I started digging, researching, pulling at every loose thread I could find. I found references to an old fraternal order that had roots in the town, way back in the early 1900s. The names were vague, the mentions scarce, but one thing stood out. Whispers of a secret society operating under religious pretense. Rituals, sacrifice, a community built around it. The more I looked, the more I saw familiar names. Local officials, business owners, people who smiled too wide when you passed them in the streets. And then the letters started. First in my mailbox, then slid under my door, anonymous, threatening, warning me to stop digging. I started seeing the same cars parked near my house. I felt eyes on me when I left for work. I changed my number, shut down my accounts. I packed what I could and left. I moved to another state under a different name. I started over. But even now, I can't relax. Sometimes I wake up at night and feel like someone's outside, watching, waiting, and every so often when I pass a mirror or glance out the window, I swear I see her. The girl in the white nightgown. She hasn't left me, not really. And deep down I know the truth. They're still out there, and one day, they might come for me. I took a job as a night security guard for the old historical town, thinking it would be an easy gig. Established in the early 1800s, the town was a popular daytime attraction with its old homes, post office, grocery store, town hall, and jail still standing. My job was simple: keep an eye out for vandals and make sure no one trespassed after hours. Most nights, I'd sit in my car watching movies or playing games on my phone. It was usually boring, nothing ever happened. Until one night. I was in my car watching a movie when I thought I saw a flash of light near the old jail. I glanced up, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so I went back to my movie. A few minutes later, I saw the flash again. This time, it really caught my attention. I stopped the movie, grabbed my flashlight, and got out of the car, heading towards the jail. Assuming it was some kids trying to sneak in, I shined my light towards the building. When I arrived, everything seemed normal. I walked around the jail, but saw no one. Then, I heard a noise come from inside. I walked to one of the windows and shined the light in, catching a glimpse of someone quickly walking past. Assuming it was the kids that broke in, I yelled that they were trespassing and they needed to leave right now. I got no response. Knowing that I needed to get them out, I headed back to my car to get the keys that opened all of the buildings. Returning to the jail, I fumbled with the keys until I found the right one and unlocked the door. Inside, I walked to the cell area where I had seen the figure. I yelled out saying they needed to leave now or I would call the cops. Still, no response, and the jail area was quiet. I searched every corner, but found nothing. Frustrated, I yelled again that I was calling the cops. Still no response or sounds from anywhere. Suddenly, I felt a cold breath on my ear and heard a low, deep voice say, "Get out." I spun around, but there was no one there. Terrified, I bolted out of the jail, dropping the keys in my haste. I ran to my car, locking the car doors and staring at the jail's entrance, my heart pounding. Trying to rationalize, I convinced myself it must have been the kids playing a prank. But then I remembered I had dropped my keys. I had to go back. Pumping myself up, I got out of the car and approached the jail again, determined to show these kids I meant business. As I reached the door, I saw a dark shape just inside. Raising my flashlight, I saw the keys floating in the air behind a dark mass. Then, with a sudden force, the keys were thrown out of the door, and the door slammed shut. I screamed and ran back to my car, locking myself inside. I stayed there until morning, too scared to move. When the manager arrived, I told him my keys were in front of the jail, and that I quit. I never went back. I don't know what I saw that night, but it wasn't human. I wasn't a believer in ghosts before either, but I am now. I still remember that field trip back in elementary school, when our class visited Gettysburg. It was supposed to be a fun and educational trip, and for the most part, it was. We spent the day touring the battlefield, standing in the very spots where soldiers fought and died. The guides talked about Pickett's Charge, and even as a kid, I could almost imagine what it must have looked like. Then we visited Devil's Den, which was probably one of my favorite stops. Little Round Top was another stop, the view expansive and eerily calm, knowing the violence that had once torn through here. But things took a turn when we got to Jennie Wade's house. As soon as I stepped inside, something felt off. I couldn't quite explain it, but the air was heavier here. The rest of the class didn't seem to notice, but I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. Our guide started talking about Jennie Wade, the only civilian killed during the Battle of Gettysburg. She was baking bread when a stray bullet came through the door, striking her down. The guide led us from room to room, sharing bits of history as we walked, but my attention kept drifting. There was a room off to the right, and as I glanced over, I saw her, a woman, standing by the window. She was wearing a long black dress, the kind you'd see in old Civil War photographs, and her hair was pulled back into a tight bun. At first, I assumed she must be part of the tour, maybe a reenactor dressed for the occasion, but something about her seemed off. Without thinking, I found myself straying from the group. My feet carried me into the room, closer to the woman. She didn't move, just stared out the window, as if she was waiting for something. I hesitated for a moment before asking her what she was doing. The woman turned slowly, her expression calm, almost serene. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She said she was enjoying the nice weather. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but there was a weight to it that made me uneasy. She looked at me and said I should go back to my friends. She looked towards the door. I turned to look as well, but my group was gone. I spun back to face the woman, but she was no longer there. The room was empty, as if she never existed. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. I knew even as a kid that someone couldn't have just disappeared from a room like that. A moment later, my teacher appeared in the doorway, her expression stern. She asked me what I was doing in here, that I shouldn't leave the group. I tried to tell her about the woman I had just saw and how she had disappeared, but she was having none of it. She just grabbed my arm and led me back to the group. I spent the rest of the tour in a daze, barely listening to the guide. I kept glancing back at that room, half expecting to see the woman again, but she never reappeared. As we were leaving, something caught my eye, a picture on the wall. It was her, the woman I had spoken to in the room, standing by the window. I hurried over to the guide, and I asked her who was in the picture, pointing to it. The guide glanced at it and smiled. She said that was Jennie Wade, the person who we'd been talking about on the tour. I looked at the tour guide with confusion. I told her I just saw her in one of the bedrooms. The guide's smile faltered, and a look of shock crossed her face. She leaned in closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. She said that I was not the first to see her there. It took me years to fully understand what had happened that day, but now, looking back, I know the truth. I had met Jennie Wade, her ghost, still lingering in the house where she had lost her life. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that she's still there, watching from the window, waiting for something or someone.